Knows everybody. I'm Cindy Montero and our new city manager, Carolyn Lair. And Tim from NBS is going to give a short PowerPoint presentation. And then I've got some talking notes here to talk about. And there'll be some questions and answers, and then we'll get right into the meat of this. I hope we can get everybody out of here by 5 o'clock or maybe before. So we're going to get started with Tim's quick presentation.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Jeff. I put you down there, Jeff, but you can sit wherever you want.
Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try and make this pretty brief. I know everybody's got things that they need to do, but we'll get through it. I've just got a few slides here to just kind of give some context around what we're doing, what we're talking about. We did a little bit of research just to give everybody comfort that, you know, what we're doing is within the norms, or what we're talking about doing here is within the norms of other PBIDs around California and beyond. But really the only, I know this is like presentation 101, you never put that many words on a slide, but you can have a copy of this later or whatever to read it. This is literally the only guidance in the state law that talks about what the owners association is, right? So our nonprofit group that runs the Emeryville round, essentially. This is really all there is. And the only thing in there that I want to point out is that you can, the law allows you to, doesn't say you have to, but allows you to create an owners association, which the TMA is essentially the owners association. And it just says it's a private entity, and it has board members. They're not public officials, but meetings need to be subject to the Brown Act, which is statewide code speak for open and transparent meetings. So you have to notify people and have a certain amount of transparency involved. So the only reason I put that up there again is just to let everybody know this is really the only guidance in the state law that we look to. Now, in the actual management plan that was adopted and was approved are a few different things. And forgive me for reading some of this, but just to be clear, the TMA will be governed by a board of directors whose membership is designed to equitably represent all stakeholders and areas of the city. So the express policy decision was to make sure it's equitable and represents everybody. We do want specific provisions for representing residential. As everybody knows, in the past, residential was sort of in and out in terms of the assessment, but now everybody pays, everybody gets representation as well as the commercial and industrial. So here's the operative statement in the management plan. The city will facilitate, why we're meeting right now, to have a discussion about the bylaws, update them as needed, and roll forward, really. The board composition and the bylaws shall be ratified by a general membership meeting in the near future, and clarify that everybody's good with the new bylaws, and then that gets incorporated into new agreements, and we move forward. So I just gave you the background as to the very little amount of state guidance that we have. We have a little bit of guidance from the management plan that was adopted and ratified. So this is just another sort of guidepost, if you will. This is a rough summary, a summarized summary of the assessment for the next year. So as you can see, commercial makes up about 2/3 of the paying assessment. Residential now, is a significant part, 20%, 21% if you want to round, and 6% for industrial, and then sort of all other city and some other entities, 5%. So this is going to be important, and we'll refer back to this. So again,
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Those percentages did not include a general benefit contribution?
That's the actual pay. Yes, you're right.
Okay.
It's only the assessments, not the total budget. Good question. Yeah. So again, just to give everybody comfort, because everybody does this all the time, we wanted to kind of give you an idea of what some other PBIDs are, because the state law is so vague. What are other people doing? Does what we're talking about meet the norms? So we looked at probably 10 examples, and we looked at some in particular that have residential, and to see what makes sense. And so a couple that are closest to home are here. Obviously, Temescal is very close by. Again, there's a lot of words on the page. You can read these later, but basically, the membership is a minimum of 9 and a maximum of 19. Some of these words get a little unwieldy, in my opinion. You have property owners, you have merchants, so business owners, and then you have a couple community members at large. You want a majority, this is directly from the management plan, the majority of the director seats to be held by property owners, so, paying assessees, and then merchants who obviously have a say in Temescal. Temescal is different, it doesn't provide transportation, but it really is business-related services directly, and then community members, also residents. Oops. So directors reflect the diversity of the business types, geographic locations. So kind of like what our mantra was in our management plan, you want to reflect what's going on in the diversity who's paying. Yerba Buena, of course, San Francisco likes to make things complicated, so there's actually a pretty complicated formula, so I won't bother you with too much detail, except to point out that you'll see down towards the bottom, there's definitely residents involved, business owners have a pretty heavy presence, and then in sort of San Francisco fashion, there's a lot of community organizations and sort of at-large membership. And this Yerba Buena, if you're familiar with that, right in the city around Moscone Center and stuff, really provides a lot of service, homeless services to graffiti removal, to traffic, to, steam cleaning. It's a pretty broad repertoire of services. At least 20% of the directors are business owners who do not own commercial property. So a specific, floor to having people in there that are business owners but don't own. And again, we looked at others, Long Beach, Seattle, others that had residential as well as commercial representation, somewhere along the lines of, what they pay in. So currently, you all know this probably better than I, we've had 7 corporate members with paying the largest assessments, 1 business member, 1 residential member from an HOA or whatever, kind of what we had in the past, and then a public member. And then I put some notes here just in terms of sort of who qualifies as a member. You have to remember that prior to the new assessment formula, some people were paying sort of like dues in a way, and they weren't assessees per se. So it's a little different paradigm as we move forward. So the red line bylaws that you've seen that have been proposed are 11 directors. Again, the 7 corporate members representing the highest assessees, which obviously, is going to change a little bit because of the assessment formula. 2 business members, so folks that operate businesses, people that are, very involved in the community. 2 residential members designated by the city council. And again, 2 mathematically makes a lot of sense, as I pointed out, that it's 20% of the assessment, right? That residential pay. And then the whole discussion of membership. And Cindy and I were talking a little bit earlier, these bylaws go back to sort of the old days. And some aspects still reflect a little bit of language that probably we may just need to delete, like about homeowners associations and things. It's kind of the old paradigm, but that's kind of an aside. But tuning that up now obviously makes a lot of sense. Again, there's many different ways to do this. We talked about a couple different alternatives. This is just one, and frankly, it's not a huge change from what's in the red line. But this is the way you could do it. You could have 6 corporate members representing, the largest assessees. 2 business members, again, that seems to be an important component of any T-bid. 2 residential members. This is up for discussion. Industrial is kind of almost an antiquated use code in a way, but there is 6%, so it's, round. If you have 10 or 11, it sort of rounds to 1, depending on how you want to look at it. So again, not a huge difference from what's proposed in the red line version that you're looking at. Again, I go back to this slide about showing sort of who the assessees are, and looking at sort of that balance of residential and business seems to make sense. Yes,
It's okay to ask a question. It
please.
sounds like the property owners are that the formula seems to make all the votes for the residential, or commercial, and even industrial in the current format held by the top 6 or 7 owners. What percentage of commercial property is held by the top 6 or 7? I'm a small property owner,
Mhm.
and I was elected as a small property owner, and my calculations were that like 30 or 40% of the members and the PBID payers are represented by just me when I did it,
Gotcha, yeah.
which seemed to be very disproportional, and so the top 7, which you're suggesting, the draft proposal says has 7 votes. Why them as opposed? Why just the top 7? Because they're the big companies, Novartis and.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly up to discussion, and there's been a lot of discussion about even, the voting formula, right? It is $1, 1 vote, right? So this is a, a paying in kind of organization, right? So that's why you can see that, the largest payers are paying.
So
but
Andrew,
I don't have
I
a
asked
number.
that question of the TMA manager, if you don't have that.
I don't have it off the top of my head.
I was told it was 41% of 67, so 2/3 of the commercial is the top 7.
2/3 or
That's
47%?
41% of the total.
Of the total.
Of the
is
total,
largest,
so
right.
41
Oh, I know,
compares
I
to
think so.
67%.
It's lower than that when the residential was added, it lowered it.
I just asked this question
No,
of
no, no,
the
I'm just
people
trying
who
to
have the
figure out.
roles, right? I didn't do it. I
Yeah.
believe they looked at the
So-
plan and added it up, right? So,
So the top 7 represent 41% of the total.
Of the total.
yeah, so 40,
Of the
it would,
34
that
of the
41 of
3,400,000.
67. So
Yeah.
roughly not quite 2/3 of the commercial total.
Okay.
Different than what you thought.
Yeah, no, different than
I
I
see what
thought.
you're saying. Of the commercial total, you're
They're
saying
2/3, those
41%.
7 are 2/3 of the commercial.
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
Yes.
Quickly describe the other for us, please.
Other, it's like the city, I think East Transit is in there, the school district. It's really kind of just
Public agencies.
mostly public agencies and some that sort of defy classification.
Thanks.
Yes.
One other related question. I noticed the other groups often had a larger number of board members.
Oh, right, like a 20-year.
Or,
Up-
yeah,
up
I
to
mean,
90,
10 is 10 or
so,
12 is good. It was just seeming that every group that had 6 or 10, would it be possible to have every group that had, if we choose 6%, we were talking about industrial, you could have 1 vote for every 6%. That is, the industrial theoretically would be represented.
You could definitely have a larger board, and as some of the examples, there are some that go quite large.
Yeah,
I'm a
you don't want
practical
that.
kind of person. I think that you have that many, it's going to be hard to fill the seats. You're gonna have quorum issues all the time.
Yeah.
And 2, trying to orchestrate 20 schedules in this day and age is just virtually, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's difficult, obviously. So I mean, 10, 11, 12 seems to be a good number. 11, obviously, if you have a split vote, you've got a tiebreaker there.
I was
Yes.
on a committee with 17, and it was really unmanageable. It was very difficult to keep anything within a time frame because everybody had something to say, and we never got anything done. It was just very difficult.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Is there a reason that you don't have any retail category that is merged with the commercial?
Well, the business members, well, you're talking about in here?
Yeah, how come,
Well, commercial covers, it's, the use codes are kind of goofy in a way, and you'll have like a commercial building that might have office, retail, and restaurant all in the same building. So we can break it out, and we've done some breakouts, but for this summary, it just seemed to make sense.
just because of traffic, use basically, because fundamentally this is based on use. That was the
Right.
concept.
Yep.
So it would seem that having a retail category would be very pragmatic.
We actually
Overall.
do, yeah, we have kind of a retail use code category. We just summarized it here just because we didn't want to have this spreadsheet with, you know.
The retail pay more,
Mhm.
so, for example, we've been the largest payer for decades, and I think Jen's gonna
Beat
take
you
that.
this year. Thank you. Oh
I'm
yeah,
not
something to be
sure.
proud
But-
of.
So what I'm saying is, the retailers are already,
Well, the problem is you're mixed use. So you're a city that's expanding growth, you know, especially with like public market, with residential and retail all mixed in, mixed use properties. So I don't know how we being Bay Street,
Mhm.
would discertain retail versus the residential versus.
Well, fundamentally, you want to work on.
Fundamentally, it's
on
commercial.
Traffic use, it's based on use, really,
Mhm.
trips, mileage, number of warm bodies. So that's why I brought that up.
But that's also how the categories, the 25 categories, isn't that how the categories were developed from that formula that you used?
Mhm.
That was based on some formula that they
You mean on the
have for different
assessment?
types, yeah, so different
Right.
types of businesses
Yeah.
generate certain numbers of trips, and that's where
How they
those
charge it.
categories
Yeah.
and. the
Can you go
amount-
back to
Yeah,
the commercial
they did,
side?
that was
Can you
related
go back
to
to the
use.
one right that was
Yeah.
up there?
The numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah,
This one?
yeah. I just wanted to see it again, sorry. Well, it's just, I know how many people come to Emeryville to commute to go to work for commercial basis. I mean, I'm very new here, and I've heard numbers being thrown around like crazy versus the people that live here versus the people that
Pretty big.
commute in here.
About
It's
30
hu-
about
yeah,
30,000 a
it's
day.
huge. I've never, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm from DC. I've
And
never
our
lived in an
population
area
is
like
that
that.
big, yeah.
So when I look at commercial, I mean, they could be coming in for anything. They could be coming in for retail, they could be coming in for residential, they could be coming in for hotels.
Or to
We have
Or to work,
Huge
or,
number.
yeah.
so I have a, we're in the
So
Q&A.
commercial, I think,
Pardon?
could be
Yes.
anything.
Keep going.
So we're here to talk about governance, right? Can you outline for us how much decision-making power exists or is already predetermined by the management plan? I mean, my sense of it is that there isn't a lot of material decision, you know, that the plan specifies a lot of how the system's gonna run.
Right, it has to, right, for
So-
the assessment to be valid.
You know, you feel less or more comfortable based on the people who are in charge, how much they can change, right? That's really matters. Do they control everything or control very little? So can you just give us a notion of that?
So, yeah, who's running the show, basically?
Yeah,
is the
that's
question. So, well, I mean, think about this, there's a few things. One, the city and the city council control the purse strings, because they are the ones, the only body that's able to levy the assessment. So the city council obviously has to feel comfortable and to continue to levy the assessment. So that's sort of one piece of this pie, if you will. The second is then the board of the TMA, who's, as you point out, Jeff, you know, makes certain decisions within some confines, knowing that we're still providing this service, right? And then there's the actual running of the service, which is, you know, contracted out. So really, what does the board do? I think really tries to improve the program and make incremental changes that are going to help from a policy standpoint, but obviously the board's not driving the buses or, you know, doing these.
Not yet.
Is there a question?
Yeah, why is it necessary to have a corporate class? Because they're really business members. So why is it necessary to have a distinction of the corporate class? When it was founded, that made sense because there was only a few people involved. But now that you have thousands of people involved, I think you should just have, you know, commercial, residential, and if you wanted to do industrial, then maybe that. But I don't see any reason to have a corporate class.
You're talking about the way it's laid out in the bylaws? I
Yeah.
mean, that's maybe a good question for the lawyer who writes the bylaws, but I mean, I think if you think about it, step back, the point of this membership structure is to have property owners that, you know, significant property owners and, you know, well, all property owners, and then business owners, so people that are active in the business community that may, you know, not own property, as well as residents. So I think the lay of it makes sense. The terminology corporate member maybe doesn't, reflect the reality of today, but yes.
I've been observing these meetings now for 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure how long. And leading up to the PB election, the main focus that I experienced attending these meetings was there was this huge fight going on over how much people paid. That was whatever we said about how many representatives we had and everything, it was all just really how much are we going to pay, with the thrust coming from smaller businesses to pay less. And I would hope that with the work that was done to change the dues structure and to try to be fair, I would like us to be able to set some of this aside now and to move forward on improving the service, because too much of the TMA time, management time, and board meetings have been devoted to fighting over who's paying what. And I'd like to actually see the service is working well. I'd like to see it working better. I'm speaking as a resident.
Well, it seems like.
And I'm also speaking as the chair of the Commission on Aging, and the service is important to seniors.
Well, I think it's a good point. I mean, we've kind of cathartic process, right? We've gone through it, we voted, we're moving on. So yeah, improve the service, improve it for everybody that's paying into it.
Well, I agree that I think that a lot of time was devoted in the last several years to the fact that it did appear to be an unfair, division between what retail and business were paying and what the really small, or industrial or, but I agree that that has been resolved in the way the assessments were broken out, and we should move forward.
Well, but the question becomes, according to the council mandate, what is equitable on the representation? And so it sounds, if you're going to have 10 board members, each one of them should represent approximately 10% of the ratepayers. Is that a correct statement of equitable, or?
Yeah, why don't you just keep the same percent?
Excuse me?
Why don't you just keep the same percent?
You-
Of board members
well,
versus-
you are, but,
Business owners don't fit into this because they don't actually pay the assessment.
and why should they be?
I don't think that's the case.
They don't pay it directly.
The property owners.
Well, they sort of pay it, so I think to
They
answer
might,
your question.
if they own their business, they
They
might.
pay it through other
Right?
means, like
You know, you
paying
can't,
out
I don't think it's correct to say that they don't. They might.
Some
They
do,
don't
some
have
don't.
to.
If you're
Yeah.
saying they have a triple net lease and all that stuff, yeah.
Or they may own the building, right? I mean, you can have a business that operates in a building in which they own.
Yeah, but
They-
the tax is
they exist.
imposed on the property owner, correct?
Yeah, but if the business, let's say, ABC Carpet Cleaning is the legal owner of the building, they're the taxed
paying the
entity,
tax.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
I mean-
that study hasn't been done to figure out how many business owners are actually.
Right.
And my only point is that if we're talking about equitable, and we're trying to allocate the voting or membership on the board between the people who are paying the assessment, why, this proposal seems to have a corporate member, what are the 2 smallest corporate members who are getting representation on the board?
Well, so I'd
Jeff,
like
you
to
know
give
that
some
more.
thoughts. You've been on the board, so I've been on it. Jen's new on it. A lot of you have come to meetings. Our country has both, right? Congress is voted purely by numbers of people, and Senate is based on something totally different, and it's a mix. This country's not run with
Yeah, but
every...
this is a peeping. isn't it?
Okay, but just, please, let me finish. The biggest, and I will say, Joyce, I viewed the last couple years less than you did as fighting, and more about a lot of dynamic discussion of the equity in the system and who's paying what. And I think the new allocation amongst uses, and that was the really big concern, and that some weren't paying anything, right? I mean, it was how much everybody's paying, if at all. And this, everyone's in there, and there's a new formula that has more logic than the old one. So it was tense at times, but I felt like it was a valuable process that got us something that's much more equitable, much more. And reflective of more of the changing times too. A big part of that period, I thought, we were just sharing information that not everyone had, and some of us didn't have, is who's really writing it, you know, and how many residents are writing it to leave for jobs elsewhere and so forth. And all that was good information and shows us where it is today. It may not be that way in 10 years, and it wasn't that way 10 years ago, but it's a good shot of where we are today. So I felt differently about it. But my biggest comment is you got to have a system that works. And I don't know how you would, one of the benefits, to be honest, of having some corporate members is they're automatically defined. So we're not having races that people are having campaign budgets and lobbying and all that stuff. Because one of the biggest problems is getting a volunteer board to show up and devote the
Yeah,
time
that's the real
to work
problem.
on it. We have that is a real issue.
That's the
You've
real
seen that.
I agree, by the way, on the point. The question is we've been told that we have to have an equitable system. And it has to be, if it does not seem equitable to me that if you have, let's say, the smallest of the 7 getting representation on the board with, I don't know, 4%, 3%, and you have the small property owners who have 20% of the total having only one vote. That doesn't seem.
What was proposed is 2.
There's 2 proposed.
Wasn't one of them the Chamber of Commerce or something?
No,
Or-
there is no longer.
that was a different
That's being
one.
changed to a business.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were
It's
proposing that there
business,
be.
yeah.
So-
That
So-
there be 2 business representatives
the
from,
small property owners, let's call them that.
yeah.
Yes.
2.
Yeah.
And by the way, I agree totally with Mr. Sears, is that it's very hard often to have people show up who are volunteers. And a lot of the counterpart of it is that the big corporations, they often have people who don't really care about the operations of the bus so much. So, but I'm just trying to.
Is that what you
yeah.
experienced honestly, Andrew? I
Yeah,
mean,
I think that there was certain people who have property owners, big property owners who have operations like, your group, and they're very concerned with this.
But that isn't my sense, but everyone
Yeah.
can have their own view.
Well,
You were
I
there
also-
to see it,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
That's what.
I have not felt that way.
I-
I mean, the ones who
I
don't
like
show,
Don't show.
and that's true of all seats. I mean,
Yeah.
the small business seat has been vacant many times. So I don't want to make value judgments, but it's hard to feel like there's
No, I don't think there's a
screaming
big
need
demand.
there that isn't
Yeah.
being met because they don't come to the meeting, right?
And I
So-
think-
I've had that experience talking directly to people that represented corporations
What?
on the board. They didn't really pay much attention
Yeah,
because they had to answer to some CEO somewhere.
yeah, they answered to some CEO.
Not
But I
everyone.
do, sorry.
Okay, what Jeff is describing is the problem with elections, and elections is about democracy. Nobody deserves an assigned seat. Elections is how we function, that's how this country operates. To make the assumption that someone's gonna run for the board and then not show up for the meeting, that doesn't make any sense. You're more likely to show up if you're gonna run for election and you're gonna make that initiative. But if you don't get elected, you don't know who you represent. You don't know about any of the concerns of the people, of all the members. You're just concerned about your own concern, and I think that's the problem, having assigned seats.
Well, Ken, I will say that the small business seat was filled by election, and it's been extremely vacant. Now, I'm not making choices. People have businesses, and they're not conscripted servants, and they're not being paid. They're just,
I hope you weren't.
But I don't.
My brief tenure.
No.
How do others
You were
do
very
that?
present,
Do they
I will
elect?
say. But my point is, I don't believe an election by itself guarantees involvement and attendance.
Yeah.
So,
I will-
so wait a second, because I have a question. So, and I looked at you very briefly, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. When you researched other cities, because I'm from DC, where bids are like, DC is full of bids. Every piece of land in DC is on a bid. So when you looked in different areas here, were they elected or were they appointed? How do our neighboring cities handle this situation?
It's, to Jeff's point, appointed seems to be the thing because there's not that many people interested. It's
So-
only people who really have a dedicated interest and express the interest that they get,
Interesting.
on these boards, or they get voted in by the existing board, sort of drafted.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't typically see, elections, campaigning, people putting up lawn signs or,
But appointed and assigned are two different things.
So traditionally, who has been appointed to this board in the past?
Well, again, each one kind of has their own.
So I'm saying, the people on the board appoint the other boards?
No, businesses
The
appoint their
businesses appoint their own
representatives, yeah.
representatives.
Yeah.
So is there a problem with that process?
No, I don't think we're talking about that.
So the problem
Well,
is
no, but we're
the,
talking about filling a seat, so.
problem is the assigned
It's
seats.
really shades of gray here at this point, whether or not it's 5 or 6 or 7.
Yeah, how many?
And a
How
couple of
many
business
representatives?
owners,
Yeah.
and
So-
a couple residential. I mean, I think we're in the zone, it's just some.
Okay, so you have made a proposal up there, not the alternative one, but the first one? Can you go over?
The first one was the red line version of the TMA board.
Okay, and then the second one is your alternative?
This is really
So
for
if you were
discussion.
to make a recommendation based on the research that you've done, because you're more educated in this than the rest of us, because you have done this research. What do you see would be more
I think
similar?
we need a gavel here. Too many people
You
talking.
guys?
We like this, I mean, I'm not gonna die on the hill for this one, if you will, but I think this, sort of is a good blend of what the history and what's going on here and sort of the new reality is that you've got, you could make it 5 or 6 sort of corporate members, maybe we need to ditch that term, but like large property owners or property owner members. And then a couple of business, members, maybe that could be 3 and 2 residential, I think everybody agrees on that. And then, industrial, how does that really fit in the new economy? I don't know, but I think everybody here seems to be more or less on the same page, it's just gonna be 5, 6, 7, whatever. I think 2 on the residential makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
Well, 2 or 3, but no less than 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think
So-
you do want, we're not going strictly by paying, because again, payers technically are only property owners. So having business owners in there is a good, I think, add back, and it is a good voice in the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, does everybody then agree with this? I mean, realistically, we're here to accept this, correct?
Well,
Is this
I think
again-
there's some other issues we need to
Thank
go
you.
through.
Thank you.
Also with the bylaws, not just the governance portion of it.
Okay.
So I've got a little list here, but
Well,
we can start.
if we feel comfortable with this, then if we were to go around the room and feel comfortable with this, then can we move on to the other areas?
I just had one
I'm
other
just throwing it out
suggestion.
there.
Just had one other suggestion. I suggested a
I don't want
seven-member
to
board
spend
because it
another
would be
hour
easier
arguing over this.
to.
I
A
agree.
seven-member board would be easier to get a quorum, because
mentioned
there really
moving
aren't that
on
many
again.
complicated issues to decide. So if you had a seven-member board with 5 commercial or business members and 2 residential members, I think that would do it.
How many what?
7 members, 5 commercial and 2 residential. I think that would do it.
Andy has a question here.
I think you might get consensus for this, but let's hear the rest of the text changes and then come back to it.
Yeah, okay.
That's a very good
proposal.
idea.
All right, so I'm just gonna go through this, and basically, we're gonna keep it with 3 classifications, and that's a question, corporate, business members, and residents. So if you look at the bylaws, there were 4 different, there was the elimination of the public member sector, which was the Chamber of Commerce. And so in corporate too, I think maybe we need to make sure that we have a balance of retail, R&D, and, office space. So that you may want to add something like that in there, just as a
Should we
change.
ditch the word corporate and call it
Or that's
property
another-
owner or something?
Probably.
Or
Just
then
eliminate it.
Just
Corporate
eliminate it
doesn't
and call it
You don't need
property.
it.
I mean, I don't know what,
It's kind of a hot
Do you have any
word.
sense?
Sorry.
What do you?
Should we ditch the term corporate
corporate.
and just go with
Property.
straight property
Property owners.
owners?
I don't think anyone even is aware of what that means.
Property owners'
Commercial
largest
property
assessment.
owners, right?
Well, because property owners,
I like the word.
I would make
commercial.
sure the word largest assessment.
I like the word commercial in here.
Large,
I like commercial.
Largest,
Commercial
Largest.
largest assessments, like you have it on there, because otherwise commercial I'll be quite honest, I mean, we're one of the largest payers, obviously, we're having this back and forth, huh? But,
Yeah.
largest assessments, to me, keeps me as the property owner's representative on the board. If you just go business owners paying property taxes, then that doesn't necessarily keep me on the board.
In the cash,
Commercial
okay.
property owners though would, so.
Largest
commercial.
assessment,
Largest.
Well, that would be the definition.
Yeah.
As we said that, right?
as long as the definition stays the
Mhm.
same.
Mhm.
Whatever you wanna call it, who cares?
Yeah, so, okay, that's good, I like this. It's-
Moving on.
Moving right along.
Go, go, go.
And do we all agree that we want to add the industrial classification?
Yeah.
I would rather roll that into the 2 business, I'd make it 3 businesses, because there's only 6% total, and I think that gives them sort of an uneven and disproportionate, voice personally, and, and maybe one of the 3 businesses, if somebody in an industrial, with an industrial
Yes.
property would want to run and would be elected.
That seems right.
I like that.
How many permits do you have in for industrial right now compared to commercial? How many more businesses are expanding in the industrial category versus the commercial category?
Is likely not to be a growth area over the next.
Well, that's my
15
whole
years.
point, is if it's not a growth area and you're trying to put something in place that's going to be in the future, I would think 5 years from now, not today.
Okay.
That's
so-
my only comment.
So is everybody in agreement about a 3rd business?
Sure.
Yeah,
Basically,
Yeah,
6,
basically
3,
the
and 2.
industrial.
Yeah.
So
I
it'd be
think I'd
6,
be with
3, and
that.
2?
yeah.
6, 3, 2.
I would just say,
Not running amok of fairness under the law by deleting industrial. If somebody give an opinion that we're not running amok of the law by deleting industrial.
well, it never
before you
was
do it.
there.
It's
It's just-
really, they can roll under commercial, right, because they're a
Yeah.
commercial interest.
It doesn't bother me at all. I just
Yeah.
don't want to get
I
sued
think
over
it's,
it.
I think it's fine.
That's a
You may
good
be
point.
coming to this, but the method of selecting the people really matters.
That's where we're coming to.
Okay.
We're getting there. Yeah, we're hoping, like I said, to get
So
us out of here.
we're all okay on that.
We're all okay, we're gonna make.
I'm
3
okay with it if you have a way to fill the seats.
That's
you know.
critical.
Because that is I will say just right up front, the board can't go into the business of being the registrar of elections. It can't.
Mhm, right.
It's not set up for that.
No, I think it's, the way the bylaws read now is the business members select the business members who are going to serve on the TMA board, and that would stay.
Yeah, but the way it was done in the past is the TMA ran an election.
No,
I mean, and that didn't work,
then we
right?
need to change whatever
Yeah.
the word is
So-
there, so.
How would they get it seated? Business members?
Well, that's my question, Ken. I don't know, I didn't come with an answer, but
All right, when we
the
get
business
there-
people who would.
That's not-
Well, you all, I mean, you're representing those areas, you should give your thoughts about how they should be picked, right? I mean,
Sure, and then,
as long as it isn't an onerous, expensive effort by someone else, you can't,
Well, what do you mean by somebody else? I mean,
well, come up with a system that works without tons of intervention.
So a business owner then is not in the classification of being a property owner,
oh, business
is
owners.
what you're.
Yeah.
Well, that's.
Well,
So
we're
they
not
could be,
saying
they could be
Oh, I
renting
see.
But if,
space.
Well,
but
how
if the
about you
business,
have-
but if the business owner is a property owner, then they fall into the,
In some P-bids, and particularly in San Francisco, if you're a business owner, then you can't be a property owner. I mean, they wanted that distinction, so literally a tenant, right? A tenant.
yeah, so I think you need to just lay that out, and get clear
Well,
on.
is that why it was?
So
you're
Is
not
that
a-
why it was corporate before, though?
No, I don't think that the history of why it was corporate, the corporate really referred to property owner.
So what would you suggest there?
I think if you're gonna have business owners, they should just be business owners, not property owners. That just seems clear, because they might have a different point of view. They might not be paying
Well,
into
and
it.
if,
so just as a
They could be
clarification,
renting,
the
which would have a
business
different
owner
point of view.
definition, the business owner definition is persons or entities who own commercial property or operate a business in Emeryville. So,
I think that's contrary to what you're trying to obtain, because say Jeff has a business and he's a property owner. I have a business, I'm a property owner. But it's not a retail business, it's not a wholesale business. I think your intent really is to have business owners that don't own their own property and don't receive a tax bill
Correct.
for paying in.
Well, I don't think equity would be served necessarily by having three people. Let's say there are three business owners, none of whom pay a nickel into the system, and they
They all-
occupy those
Yeah.
three
Yeah,
seats.
that doesn't
Right.
make sense to me. I mean,
That's just to get the
I agree with
clarification.
Jeff.
Yeah, I
Well,
agree with Jeff on that.
So the existing definition would make it either or, so it could
Yeah.
happen, but you as property owners
Well,
can also, whatever system comes up.
Yeah, I'm not biased one way or the other, I'm just
No,
saying.
no, I don't
well,
think you
but
should
they're
exclude the property
representing their
owners.
No.
business.
Excuse me?
They're representing their business, so it shouldn't matter whether they're,
I mean, I think it should be
Property owners or not. It could
property
be either
owners
or.
or
I think it should be
business
either
owners.
or.
Yeah.
Let me just throw this out there for discussion, is it seems like the or is a problem. It shouldn't matter whether you own your property or not, but that you have a business,
But that
and
you
you
have
have
a
a
business.
business license to
Yeah.
operate in Emeryville.
I agree.
So I don't know if you need to make distinction of, one restaurant, one retail, one, professional service or something. I don't think that makes
I think
sense.
fundamentally you want people that are interested in the system.
Right.
And if you're a big multinational corporation that owns property here, you might not care. I mean,
And actually, yeah.
Well, they're not gonna wanna be on the board, right?
So this.
Yeah, but
but they have been on the
But
board.
they have to be
But
on
they
the
have
board.
been on the board, and I'm not necessarily saying they're interested or they're not. You want people that are interested in the functioning of the system.
Yeah.
So a little bit of
Yeah,
dialogue.
but interestingly, if you're saying someone doesn't come, then they don't have a vote. So they've lost their benefit. I mean, right, if they aren't coming to the meetings, they aren't voting, and they don't have any governance power. No.
Right.
And people who are paying into the system, they would have some interest on some level because they're having somebody who's going to be answering to them. If they have a large enough, assessment, they're going to have some people who are using the system, whether it be retail or whatever.
Yeah, I'm gonna step
And they're
back.
going to hear from
You're
them,
gonna
right?
what?
I want to step back because I actually look at the business as, you're talking about public transportation. So businesses here, whether they pay into it or whether they don't pay into it, I know quite a few businesses in this community who their employee base is using public transportation, whether they own their ground or whether they don't own their ground. And I sit on this board, and let's face it, I'm not riding the Emery, go around every day, my kid does, but I don't. But it would be nice to have someone on that board as a new board member, whether they own the land or whether they don't own the land, where certain public transportation affects their business as a business owner. So I don't
Well,
think
so
whether
as
they
written,
own the
that would
land.
allow that,
I don't
right?
think whether they
Yeah.
own the land or not. I mean, at the end of the day, we're here for
Because to
both.
that point, you're gonna have some employees who are being affected by the
Absolutely.
whether that corporate owner is interested or not. Some employee,
Absolutely.
in that establishment is riding, the transportation.
And that employee should have a right to say something.
Right, there should be a representative from the
Absolutely.
organization.
Well, I will say, I mean, obviously our meetings are, as you said, open to the Brown Act, so anyone and everyone can come to the meeting, just like a city council meeting, and you can, so no one's limited to being heard.
Right.
The question is, do the people have votes?
Votes, yeah.
Take that into consideration. And I think, again, the people who, there are many of them here who've come to our meetings, there aren't a lot that do, but many of those people are here. I like to believe we listen to you and consider what you say.
Oh, yeah.
You would have to say if that occurs.
So then do we all agree that it's whether you own it or whether you
So
don't
if you want to look
own
at
it?
page
Thank you.
Well-
number 2, that's the definition, is that the way you want to leave it?
So we could change it to a business owner who has a business license in the city of Emeryville. Now, how we select those three is the second part of that equation, right? Does everybody agree to that? Whether or not they own property or not doesn't matter?
Well, I think, speaking as a small property owner, I think that mixing owning property and therefore being taxed or assessed is different from having a business. And I think that if merely being a property owner gives six big owners assured votes on the board, there should be some sort of consideration for the other 20% of the taxpayers. So I think part of the problem with the definition of business members is conflating a business with the property owner. And I think I believe that business owners have an interest in running the thing. But I also think that property owners, the 20% who may not ever be represented, I think there should be a separate 2 members for the business property owners and a different member or 2 for business owners.
Well, I actually don't agree with that. And the reason I don't is because of triple net leases. So a business owner who's renting a piece of land is most likely paying that property tax through a triple
Correct.
net lease.
Well-
So it doesn't matter whether they're a business owner who's renting or a business owner who's paying directly. Either way, I have lots of leases. Either way, they're paying the property tax, whatever business that is, whether it's through their lease or whether it's through CAM or taxes, insurance,
So-
pass-throughs, those kinds of things.
So when we talk equity, are we talking equity for those who are paying into the system, or are we talking about equity for those who are using the system?
Well,
Hey,
Those who are paying into it.
Which I recommend switching, yes. To people who use
Because if
it.
we talk about people who are
But
paying,
they're
we
not-
should have people at the table, who are actually paying, for the tax. And
That's
that
right.
should be all over. It just shouldn't be one set.
that's right. There should be, I think the idea of 2 residential members, because you have residential people who pay the bill, and so they need to have a voice. I think you have small property owners who represent 20% of the money going into the fund. They need to be represented. If you think that it's also good to have a business owner, which I agree because they're very interested in the operation, they should be represented. Why exclude any group? And if you think that, along with Jeff's idea, that you need some bodies that have to come in, have 6 or 5 5 largest, then you have a clear, equitable mix. I'm saying don't exclude any group, particularly a group that pays 20% of the bill.
Well, doesn't the current definition, doesn't that fulfill that?
It does.
So you have 3,
Yeah.
yeah, so I
Which
personally
section?
would, the business members, so persons or entities who own commercial property or operate a business and who pay fees
Well-
or dues,
They.
but do not qualify as corporate. So it's everybody, every
They'll
business that isn't either
override
corporate
the
or
6 top players
residential.
when they start adding more.
You mean commercial or residential?
They'll have the majority vote.
Let me suggest something.
Well,
real quick.
they'll
Do you have
say
something?
something.
Yeah, I'm gonna just break in here, this is a little bit off subject,
Yeah.
but I'm listening to all this, and what I know is this, that, the residents were not paying in the old thing, and the residents were fine with that. We use it, we don't pay. Now we're paying, okay, we're fine with that. We would much rather have the service and pay than not have the service. The entire time I was on there, or attending these meetings as an observer, the small businesses were the ones who, A, wanted to do away with the service completely, or B, wanted to cut the service so that their dues could be cut. And I still keep feeling that that is
Sure.
what's coming
Yeah.
from you. Is
That's true.
That I.
We're paying.
Could I speak, please? That what we're hearing is not the use of the service or how to make the service more valuable, and we're spending already almost an hour on this subject.
But it is a
And that's what I
process
wanna
of
say.
figuring out, you're starting kind of in the beginning.
I think Tim
Okay.
had something he wanted to say.
Well, I'm gonna kind of cut to the chase kind of guy, so let me just throw this out there. What if we go with the 632, the 6 commercial property owner members would be the highest 6 assessees from the most recent tax roll or whatever. So there's no election to worry about there. 3 business owners who have to have a business license in Emeryville, and it would be basically volunteers, and if there are more than 3, then either the city council or a lottery or something picks the 3 business owners. The 2 residential, the suggestion is that they're appointed by the city council. I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, if 10 people volunteer to be on the board, then the council will pick the 2. So you don't have any elections, you've got a 632. Seems to make sense to me, but maybe I've had too much coffee.
The only thing that I have against the 6 top businesses that are paying the taxes is that that's not happening. Because those individuals have an interest that they may not want to see the services because of the taxes that they're paying.
But they've been just the opposite.
We just-
They're the
we just
big ones
voted.
that promote
We just voted for
They're
it.
the ones that carry
Okay,
it.
you guys, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it hadn't been for the big ones.
And that was, to put it that way, that's a hard
Yeah.
one to explain
No,
in the
I-
first week.
Okay, we get that part, but on the top six, still,
It's
is
the
that
small
still, is that
businesses
essence?
that have tried to destroy these services, not the big ones. The
Unfortunately,
big
this
ones
is
that
not a
carry
one
it.
man, one vote kind of,
No.
P-bins are not structured that way from the get-go, from the balloting and all, it's $1, one vote. So I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying, but this is a hybrid.
So I just want to real quick mention something that's in the management plan that was not in there before. And this may, the small businesses may be interested in this. That the board can, if they want to make any changes to any stops that have, a special benefit, or if there is a third-party agreement, those have to go to city council for approval. So that wasn't in the management plan before,
So change in the service level.
that's right.
This gets to what do they really get to decide?
Yes,
right? I mean,
so what are they really
Well,
deciding?
but if you don't decide service level and you don't decide contractor, what do they decide?
What you've seen us deciding.
Yeah,
We're talking about how do we be efficient? Do we need to improve our driver rates to keep better drivers? I mean, it's pretty darn granular.
Yeah.
No, that's like
Andy had a
nothing.
yeah, so I'm just throwing it out, it wasn't in the management plan prior, it is now, so.
Why would it have to go to?
Is
city
this something
That's
that
good,
we
there's unlikely to be
take
any
out of the
opposition to
management
that. I
plan?
have one
Well,
question, which
but
is,
city
you
council
just
can be-
described 632 with no industrial. That's
Because
that's an odd
the
number.
city
Can you
assesses
come
the
up, can you
assessments.
draft a
They
very
are
simple
separated.
lottery,
They should
draw
be
straws or
running as
something
well.
like that for the three
I
business
just-
members?
That's what's in
Sure, we
there.
can come up with something.
And hopefully,
Could you have the city
Everybody
council
working
appoint,
together.
instead of saying the top six,
Wait a
maybe
minute,
say
wait a
out-
minute,
out-
I'm trying to close a loop here that he started a few minutes ago, and we're closing few loops, we're opening loops and
Go
not
ahead.
deciding anything, and he's right, we gotta decide something, it's pushing 4 o'clock. If you could come up with a 632 and a lottery for the 3, then we could just say yes or no. But somebody has to draft takes less than 10 minutes lottery.
Well, I
That
literally,
requires no special tools or
yeah, you
experience.
could literally put the names in a hat and, have the city clerk draw them or something,
All right, so somebody could draft
Somebody
that.
neutral, yeah.
I'd like to suggest that instead of just having the top six, why don't you have the top 10 and have like the city council appoint 6 out of the 10?
That's good, but it's a non-starter at this group, so we shouldn't waste a lot of time on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I thought about that, but then it becomes political, right?
Well, because in
Who
the assigned
is
seat,
who
though,
are the 10?
like when you have an assigned seat, so somebody becomes the 5th largest payer, then the staff has to chase them to put somebody on the board. That's what happens.
Well,
It might be a good idea, but it's not going
About,
anywhere.
if somebody doesn't show up, then it goes to the 7th or whatever, right?
No, the staff goes after, like, if it's East Bay Bridge, for example, and they don't want to send a representative, but they have a seat, the staff ends up begging them to send somebody just so they have a quorum.
It's good, but it doesn't meet Jeff's
well,
simplicity.
Ken, but
requirement.
those people do show up. And there are other people, the residential seat, now it's only been able to be occupied by a very small group of people because very few pay. No one will show up despite the begging. And, anyway, I've talked about the other seats. Ken, you're there at those meetings. The people come and get the business done. And we just need to make sure that that continues, whatever the complexion of the board, because the thing needs to run. And it can't run with people who aren't at the table.
I'll give you an example. Pixar shows up at the meetings, right? Well, first thing he told me, he said, don't send me any emails because I'm not going to read them. I don't care. And he shows up at the meetings, every meeting, he never says a word.
He's not here as
He
well.
never says a word.
Yeah, so
We can't.
let's move on here and let's decide, let's finish this governance issue. The rest of it's pretty simple, I think we can get through this. So,
I'm uncomfortable with the city council having the final say on all this.
Yeah,
And
me too.
it has felt to me like that would be the city not wanting to run a bus service, which the city has very clearly stated
Not
over and
wanting to pay for
over,
it.
but then running it through the back door.
Right, I totally agree with that. I'm really against
Yeah.
them being able to influence changes on service levels and things like that because
it's
it's
already, that vote is already
It's done.
sailed. That was in the management plan, it was voted on.
We voted on this?
Yes.
The management plan was part of the vote.
Let me clarify what that means, because let's
That
say
wasn't
that
really spelled out or in community meetings.
if you were to change the route from X Street to Y Street,
Yeah.
then it changes all the metrics on who is a
I
quarter
understand.
mile. and all
Yeah,
that.
I
So
hear
that's
that.
why
Who's
I said
assessed?
I hear that.
Who is
That's-
assessed?
Joyce, I think the management plan was too granular, myself. But we voted for it because we think it's so much better than where we were. And that the big picture is that the system's done a good job and that private people with the city have worked together. And we're just hoping and sort of trusting that that will continue. And if it doesn't, then people such as yourselves will need to go to city council and say, you made a decision that meddled with something that was working and it made it worse. And we're all gonna have to do that. And hopefully not have to do it, but that,
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, Jeff, and I understand now. I did not understand when I made those comments, although that's how I feel.
No,
But
yeah.
then that this was already voted on. But I do appreciate the work that you and the large companies have done, because you've done an excellent job of running it, and I don't see the need to change that, other than just spend more time at meetings improving it.
Well, thank you.
So
But
we still need to know the board composition, the governance, let's get that out of the way. It's the biggest piece, the rest are just small, terms, years of terms, all of that kind of stuff. So, yes, Andrew.
On the old system, it used to be I was elected by a ballot that went out to all the property owners, I guess, except the big ones. And anyone who ran, they would actually say, who do you want to vote for? And it might have been, I don't know if it worked. It worked as far as I got elected. I was only elected by 3 votes, by the way. Which totally supports what Jeff is saying. But the reason it worked and it was easier to do is that the city had a list of all the property owners, so it was easy or possible to send out a ballot saying, okay, you're a small property owner, here are the 3 people, and a write-in list, vote for 1 or 2 of them. That's like any assessment district, and it worked pretty well. If you mix business owners, which by the way I do think are probably a very important part of the board, you don't have that facility in sending something out. You do have a list of business license or something like that. That's why I'm thinking that there is an operational difference in electing a property owner versus a member of some group like.
But Andrew, aren't you suggesting though that in either case, whether it was a business that owned their own property or a business that does not own their property, they would fulfill the same category? And in both of those cases, in fact, they would have a business license on file with the city. So wouldn't that capture both of those categories? I think it does.
I don't know what the ability of the city to take business licenses out and send, okay, every 2 years, or are we gonna make it 4 years, whatever it is, every 2 or 4 years, there has to be an election of 3 board members, or 2 board members, 3 board members.
But as far as reaching out,
Yeah.
for this immediate question, I think we do have the ability to reach all of those folks because all of them, I think, should have a business license.
so Carolyn, are you,
Yeah.
if in the lottery scenario, you're saying that the city would have this list and make it known somehow that anyone with a business license can have to go submit their name and they go into a hat? I mean, or
I wouldn't necessarily propose that. I thought that the previous system or the
The
current
voting.
system is the
Yeah.
vote based on sending the ballots out and you're marking who you want. And it would not include, of course, those are the big corporate payers because you're already on it. So it would exclude.
It does, yeah.
Votes,
And
right?
so on page 4 of the red line, that tells you how the business members are elected. And so if that works, then we keep it like that.
Sounds great.
the benefit of that, I think, is the people have to want to do it.
About it.
If all it takes is throw your hat in and you might get elected, I don't know.
I
if-
see what you're saying. Yeah, they have
I mean,
to
it's-
So let's-
volunteer.
So are we in
Well, and if
agreement?
they're gonna win, if you want to get
I get
on,
one vote, you win.
you can work to win.
Yeah.
I just,
Sure.
you know,
So the business members shall meet annually at this meeting, and 2 directors are elected. Is that?
3.
We want 3?
Yeah.
3 business.
Okay.
in lieu of the industrial, right?
And-
But
Yes.
they do have to volunteer, of course.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so, got it. All right.
And do you need to do, we're not putting in industrial on there.
No, we're changing industrial to the third
Third.
business. The business definition.
Could be industrial.
We don't want.
And the third, it could be industrial, yeah, and the third business, I'm sorry, in the, we're okay with the definition of business member. Yes, okay. Perfect, great. All right, so let's just talk about the terms real quick, because they're defined, residential term is defined as 1 year.
What page?
I
I
think
think
that
it should be 2 years. I think it should be the same as the business.
residential terms
Probably.
are
What page?
defined,
3 years?
page, Joyce?
What page?
I'm getting there, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I forgot I didn't write the
Well, I think it should be the same term as the businesses, whatever that is. I thought it was.
It is on page 10. So,
Do you,
Tim had a good idea, it's on page 10, each residential director shall hold office for a term of 1 year until they resign, they're removed, or we probably should add, if they're no longer a residential owner, right? But Tim did have a good idea, you are saying 2 years, since PBID is 15 years, they have a 3-year term. They would-
Whatever the
they would
term-
break it into.
is there a stagger going on?
And we should stagger
Yes.
those
Oh,
also.
we stagger.
Yes.
But whatever the term the businesses have, because I think that when you're going to any situation like that, it takes a little, because I've been going to those meetings for, I think, probably a little over 4 years maybe, and it takes a while to sort of really understand everything that's going
So
on.
that's what we
and-
want, a 3-year staggered terms.
Yeah.
With, there's a 15-year, so it'd be 5 different.
And so when we
terms.
first start, someone will get 1 year and someone
Yes,
will get 2
that's
and
the
someone
way
will
it's
get
gonna be.
It has to be,
In
yeah.
reality, you're gonna have some attrition, people are gonna move, you know, come and go, so you won't have a wholesale turnover at 3rd year every time, but.
Is that
Although
it?
there's some loyal residents.
No.
All right, so that's on page 10. I just want to back up a minute. We know how the resident members are going to be selected by the city council.
Yeah.
And there should be some type of application process, which we can use similar to how people apply for committees, which is agreeable. Okay. I did have a question, and I sent this out to Jeff. Membership dues and applications on page 3 and 4. Can those be eliminated? I believe those were in, the bylaws haven't been changed. When the TMA became an owners association and a representative of the PBID, prior to that, they had application process and dues in order to cover some of their expenses from when they ran their meetings. Can that be eliminated from the bylaws? It's all throughout. It's
Page 3.
it's on page 3, section 4. It talks about membership dues and application process.
Oh, yeah, I think we should eliminate that.
Well, so I have some answers from Ronnie.
Okay.
The way the quote-unquote dues have been administered is, that's the term of art for when there are people who were required to pay that aren't in the, you know, like, there's the Bay Bridge Shopping Center that's straddled, and they aren't in Emeryville, but the development agreement for the Bay Bridge scoops some of the Oakland properties to pay for Emeryville. So Ronnie believes dues was to have a way of billing people who you can't bill.
Okay.
And we could clarify that, but,
Yes.
and the other reason it was in there is if there ever, you know, again, the TMA theoretically existed before the PBID, and it might exist after. And we thought that might have happened soon, right? If it wasn't voted. And so maybe you could say, I mean, I get, you're saying you don't want some entry fee for,
Make it look like you have to apply.
yeah, but I think, you know, if you said that could be, that it won't be true during the PBID, but it could be true after,
Okay.
that would address it. Because we were very focused on how would we operate if the PBID wasn't renewed. It would shrink massively. Some people still have to pay, right? So it still would exist.
Sounds like a definition for dues should be right up front. So dues is special assessments for those within the city of Emeryville, or contractual payments if they're outside the city,
If they're
or
outside.
some other thing in the future.
Well, is
And
that
the
a
word
type of
application
workplace
can be-
situation?
An application, I mean, is there an application also, or? No, we
think
can
so.
probably eliminate that. So anyways, that's something I
Yeah.
just wanted to
We
make
need to
sure that
clean that
we can
up.
clean that up.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be.
Or you just say that they have the ability to do dues, if the PAD is not in place, per se.
Okay.
I mean, because that's what you're saying, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, you want a way of charging people when there isn't this way,
Okay,
right?
we can define it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That could be inside the city in the future,
Sure.
right? Because people have conditions of approval that may make them pay. And you have to be able to bill them, basically. You know, that's what Ronnie said, so I trust it.
All right, great, thank you for that, because I know I set that off last minute as we were sort of looking at these. For the corporations, can there be an alternate for meetings? Can we identify that if you're not available, that a corporation can
Send
appoint
an
or send somebody else? We can't do that with residents because they're appointed by the council and they're the business because they're elected.
I'm going to point that, you,
I mean,
deputy, you,
it doesn't bother me.
So I'm gonna just
Okay.
say.
It's not
listen,
it's not the person, it's the corporation who
The
has the seat
corporation.
anyway,
It's
so.
the whole corporation
It's
that
whoever that
represents.
corporation represents.
So can we add
That's
that language
fine.
into the
Yeah.
bylaws?
I think that's
I have no objection.
I have no objection.
That would apply also to the business.
They're elected.
Well, you might have a mom and pop business, literally a mom and pop, and the pop comes all the time, and he can't come, so mom's gonna come.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
realistically,
maybe for the
that
business,
makes
No
that's
conflict.
sense. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're raising good questions. It's,
They're just
how
questions.
transitive can the property be? You know, who are those people at the table? You still just need people that are contributing.
That's right, and it's just.
Maybe it only applies then to
To the corporate as well.
top payers because
Corporate.
it really does run with the
Right.
corporation.
The top six should have a requirement to inform the TMA that here's the lead member, here's the successor member, and here's the third.
That's a
member.
great idea.
That's
So that we can just make sure that there's.
And
a
then,
quorum.
but then the business owners
If
too.
the city council is going to appoint two people, they could appoint two alternates at the same time. Because you want to be able to have a quorum, that's the whole point of having the
Yeah,
alternate.
that gets
That's
to
too many.
be.
Yeah, I think if we stick with the corporations, because if they are representing the corporation.
But that gives them an unfair advantage. If you want, you know, if you want the residents to be consistently represented, then there should be an alternate. All your city council committees have alternates, and there's no reason why these two appointments couldn't have alternates also.
What's the general consensus of the table?
I'm not going to speak about the residents, so I think.
No,
Yeah,
no.
I think-
You know, there's,
I'll let others.
Smart. You gotta an alternate, two alternate residents
Or maybe like
who
outside.
want to be involved.
there's a
And
per-
if you can't get two other residents who want to be involved, then it's not gonna, it's not gonna help.
And that's why we said corporate, because then you've got six and it's a quorum, I mean, you
Well,
got.
I've served on city committee, and I believe there's some point where unexcused absences kick you off, and
That's
maybe
correct.
that's the way to protect against that.
One of the
think that
things
makes sense.
that I've observed is it's a lot harder for businesses than for residents to show up for a meeting, because you have last minute demands, you know, that, but the other is to feel that the meeting is important, and I think if you had, for the corporations, a second person, and that was made known right from the beginning of new people, it may be more of the corporate people would show.
One person and one alternate
Yeah.
for just the corporation.
Corporations, yeah, I think
And
that's, okay, that's.
And then, but because you want people sitting at the table who understand what is going on. I'm
Yeah.
not sending my secretary to go sit at a table who has no clue what's going on with the
Yeah,
other.
right,
And it's
yeah.
just a
So
suggestion
one
to make sure
person
we have a
and
quorum.
one backup.
And
Okay.
so,
Polling for the
just to
corporate.
clarify, is the alternate to be named?
Yes.
Yes.
Not just,
Yes.
whoever's
That's
available.
what they're saying.
Then that puts
Yeah.
some responsibility on the
Sure.
person.
Okay, wow, we're almost done.
Talk fast.
Yeah, okay, general membership meeting, we need, so the next thing, we're gonna make some changes, or hopefully, I don't know, we'll work together, Jeff, with, I don't know if your legal looked at this, or
Well, they draft,
made the red lines.
you've changed it, or
No, not this yet, but this.
the
these
TMA's
changes-
council drafted that?
Yes,
Yeah.
but the changes that we've all agreed on at this table, have to go into this.
I mean, yeah, we can arrange that.
Perfect.
Done by
And-
someone who's capable of drafting.
Thank you. And then the general membership meeting, so the next step in this would be for us to draft these, take another look at them real quickly, make sure all the stakeholders group agrees on these, the changes have been made. We were going to take them to city council for a draft and bless them, say this is great. And then they have to go out to a general membership meeting vote.
What does general membership mean?
It's everybody who pays into the assessment. So there's four.
Every category.
Everybody who got a ballot would have the
Would
opportunity.
get an opportunity to
That's
vote.
correct.
Okay.
Now, that could take place as a general membership meeting where people come to the meeting. Tim does have a mailing list from the ballots that we mailed out. So we can mail out postcards to everybody. So there has to be a way for that
Does
process
that
to happen.
No, the bylaws
The
say
TMA.
one vote, one property owner, so the bylaws don't have weighted votes. So, I just wanted to
The
make
votes
sure
are
you-
taken, are they not by category to
It doesn't,
vote?
it doesn't say anywhere.
You're just adopting the bylaws in
That's it.
total, right? So
Okay.
it's more or
One
less like
person,
a
one vote.
Swiss straw vote, you know, all right up and.
However you want, however we want to do that. So then the bylaws will be incorporated into the management contract that we'll present to city council sometime, we're hoping in the beginning of
And would
March.
the city send out the ballots, or is that, I think it seems to be described as a responsibility of the TMA, sends out, organizes.
General membership balance?
Yes.
Yeah, we've done that.
Would
in
you
the
say
past.
that?
But that's
Okay.
every single.
Yeah, that's where you
But
feel like
the city
you're.
would provide you
Yeah.
with what you need.
Like, that's where it's.
And then
You
how
would
do we tally it
literally
up?
Super burdensome. Well, I mean, it all depends.
Am I sitting in my living room on my floor?
Well,
No, you're not.
I just want to make sure.
Like I think Tim said, you can either just do it as a hands-up general membership meeting vote, or you can do it as a vote.
Why don't
on
we just call
ballot.
a general membership meeting?
Yeah, yeah.
And then
And so-
everybody raise their
Yeah.
hand.
The reason I'm giving that timeline,
Oral
because
vote.
that has to happen prior to March.
So we have to just check with Veronica.
So they would probably come in
would
with
do a
their
meeting.
card that they were mailed that shows that they are eligible to vote. And the city could assist as far as
We can have, we can have our mailing house
When's our next meeting?
keep the database kind of private because it does have everybody owner. We could have our mailing house just mail out the notices or something. if you
I'm
want.
gonna defer to Ronnie.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to.
We
put
can
extra
work with
time.
her on that.
Yeah.
We don't want to promise something that she's sitting on her living room floor doing.
She has the same goal, right? Everyone
Yeah,
believes
absolutely.
we should finish what was started with the vote and put this in place. So what Joyce said very well is focus on the system,
Yeah,
you know?
all right. I think I've covered everything that were questions about the bylaws. Does anybody have any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I have one question. At the end of the bylaws, doesn't it say that it's necessary to have a unanimous vote to dissolve this corporation? I know it said, I think it said something to that effect there.
I didn't do that part, but I didn't hold that.
Unanimous votes resolved. the
Oh,
corporation.
action by unanimous written consent. 9 at the bottom, any action.
And a unanimous
required-
vote's never possible, so,
You take it without a meeting, yeah, oh, okay. That just as if there is no meeting. I'm not seeing it, Kim, do you have,
okay.
do you wanna come take a look at?
It's not really good
Okay. Any other questions that anybody, any of the stakeholders have here?
Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome. Yeah, and so I'll get together with you, Jeff, we'll get
Number
these drafted up, and then we can either just send them out, everybody can take a look, make sure it's what we talked about at this
Okay.
meeting.
Sounds good to me.
And it's very good, thank you
This
so
would be
much for your
described to
time.
the council as a consensus.
as a large member, defender of the general fund, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Thanks for coming, Miguel. All right, thank you for all your time. It's great.
you.
Yes.
Well, we hit our stride, didn't we?
Okay, okay.
Everyone's up on the
Thank
top of
you,
the
yes.
You always can, I told you that.
Yeah, I know, I
All
appreciate
the
that.
time.
Appreciate